ACT Chess Association summary of their online events, but a little extra bonus chess video I thought I'd throw in on one of my favourite openings of all time, the Traxler, which I play quite a lot, and I played it all the way from when I started my chess career as a junior up until even at Chess Olympiads. Game I'm showing you, though, is not one of my own, but it was actually played in one of the ACT Chess Association tournaments that we run online at the moment. And it was played last week between Deviant Attack and M. Hummel. Now, both these players I've coached at various times. M. Hummel when he was a junior, Deviant Attack currently. So it's an interesting look at, well, my coaching style, I suppose, but also how this opening is handled. So, for those that are unfamiliar with the Traxler, I will give you a little bit of a summary as we go, but I'm not going to delve too deeply into the analysis of it because there are probably a lot more games that I can show and I may choose to show at a later stage, but I'm picking this one up. So the Traxler, or the Wilkes-Barre, as it's sometimes known, after a place in Pennsylvania in the United States, is an antidote and a very radical antidote to knight g5 in the two knights. By the way, if you've ever coached kids, they all think this is they call this the fried liver, even though the fried liver is something else, and it just drives me absolutely batty. When I say it's a radical approach, it's bishop c5 here is the move, and you're inviting white to capture on the nominally weak f7 square. But in return, what you're doing is you're going to try and get a massive lead in development as black. You're trying to swing your pieces out at the opponent's king and try and checkmate them before their material advantage can take effect. And knight takes f7 is the game that we're looking at today. The boring line is bishop takes f7, king up, rook, bishop d5, bishop b3, and I've even lost recently a game with bishop c4 as white, and then you play rook f8. The reason the king goes to e7, which looks unnatural, instead of f8 is so that the rook can take the f8 square and you can launch an attack. Now, I've won this position as black in some fast chess games against some very strong players. But this is considered not quite the refutation, but basically lots of white people will play this line rather than the knight takes f7 line. And in fact, after the game, it was played online, but after the game, a comment by black was he actually was a little bit surprised by knight takes f7 because nobody plays it anymore. That's one of the problems with the Traxler in summary, though, is that there are some lines from white that really take the fun out of it. So, after knight takes f7, the next surprise is black sacrifices with bishop takes f2. And the idea here is we're going to drag the king out into the open and try and checkmate. And king takes f2, challenges it head on. King f1 is another line. And after queen e7, I'll just go and show you a couple of example lines here. But again, this is a kind of no fun line almost. Knight takes h8, picking up the rook. d5 is the right move here. E takes d5 is almost forced because there is a line, bishop takes d5, and you just blow your queen. Okay, bishop g4 just traps the queen because e1's covered. So that's one little trick. And one of the things about the Traxler is there are lots of traps for black, and this is why it's probably such a popular opening for certain players. Knight d4, you can actually play bishop g4 straight away in another variation where the bishop goes back to e2. Now, if you are playing this as black, the most common move you'll see here is c3. Okay. I probably face this line more than any other line. Bishop g4 to drive the queen to a4. And knight d7 here is the right move. I've played king d8 and got away with it in the past. And there are probably some other choices that you can go to. But if you're faced with this line and you only want to learn one thing rather than the complicated stuff, learn this. Okay, knight d7, because after king takes f2, queen h4, g3, queen back, and we actually just have a draw by perpetual. As I said, there's lots more analysis in here which I haven't mentioned. Don't have time for it today. But sure, if you're happy to draw with black, okay, this is a line that you can play. But I'm going to point out that if you play the Traxler, happy to draw with anything is probably not why you turned up on the night to play it in the first place. You are looking for a win with an opening like this. But there you go. So, I mean, if worse comes to worse, you can always bail with a draw. But white bravely took on f2, and knight takes e4 is the follow-up here. You're attacking the king. in check, and the king normally retreats. King e3, sometimes people will try and be super brave and play king e3, but after queen h4, when I first learned this opening as a kid, I always wondered why queen f3 couldn't be played. And in the book by Tim Harding and George Botterill on the Italian, where I learnt a lot of this analysis, they just briefly mentioned knight f6, double exclamation mark 101. And I could never understand it as a kid, why this is. But it turns out that, there's a lot more analysis than I'm going to show you here. But imagine white takes, on h8. After knight d4, hitting the queen. There aren't a lot of squares for the queen now to go to. And after queen f1, for example, which is about the only square, because if you play something like, I'm going to play my queen back here, you run into, where am I looking for my checkmates in this position here? You run into trouble with a couple of moves like queen f4 or queen e4. King goes back to that, and then you just play d5. You're attacking the bishop on c4, and there's just this massive winning attack that's about to land on the board there. But as I said, when I was a kid, knight f6 kind of confused me, even though it's supposed to be winning. So the king goes to g1 instead, and then we follow up with queen h4 with the really basic threat of mate on f2. Okay, g3 is normal here. Knight takes g3. And again, it's one of these lines where if white wants to draw, white has probably lots of choices here. H takes g3 is the drawing line for white as a choice, because after queen takes g3, king f1, there's a nice little move here where you castle. The idea simply being that the pin on the knight against the king on f1 means that you can't play any annoying discovered checks by the knight on f7. The knight on f7 would love to move but can't move. d3 is right, d5 to block the bishop off from defending, and then after a move like bishop takes, black has a forced draw with bishop h3, rook takes, queen takes, king g1, king g3, king h1. But if you are looking for traps and you get to a position like this, if white instead plays king to f1, you get a very nice move here with rook a d8, and you're actually just threatening to take the bishop, obviously, and there's lines involving capturing the knight in some part. And if we retreat back here to protect the knight with the bishop, then rook d6 just wins, because you're going to swing it across to f6 and you're going to mate. So knight takes h takes c3 is a draw, so knight takes h8 is the line that keeps white going. And in fact, there's an edge for white in pretty much most of this. Not a huge edge, surprisingly, but there is. Now, knight takes h1 turns out to be a mistake, and it's a mistake that I myself have made in the past. Funnily enough, as I've got older, I've actually forgotten more analysis about the Traxler, and I actually blunder more now, even though I'm supposed to know more. So the correct move is not to take the rook on h1, but to keep just tossing material and knight d4. And again, we've got lots of threatening moves in this position, like that are going to cause some problems. So almost certainly after knight d4, white bails into the drawing line again, because everything else is worse. How much worse? I'll save that up for another day. Queen takes g3, king over, queen f4, and then we're just checking on the dark square diagonals, and that's it. So knight takes h1 was played in the actual game, and d3 is the right move to cut out too much craziness. Best move here is probably d5, and after bishop takes d5, queen d4, bishop e3 is white's only really sensible move here. And why I say that is because if you play king takes h1, you take the bishop there, king goes across to g1, you check again. If the king sails back into the corner, then bishop g4 leads to a very, very strong attack in this position here. Black's going to either set up some threats on the light square diagonal, or just castle along and swing the rook into the game as well. After bishop e3, we take, and then the king takes on h1. The difference now, of course, is there's no checks on that light square diagonal. You can play bishop h3, not that it really matters. And after knight d2, the position is a lot more equal. It's still a slight advantage for white in this position, and black is going to have to work hard to get out of this position. It's basically white is up a piece, black has an extra pawn. I think I've won these positions in fast time control chess. But yeah, I mean, only because my opponent misplayed it all. Knight f2 was in the game again. How the knight retreats from the corner, attacks the queen at the same time. Queen f3, knight to h3 looks okay. King comes up to g2. And again, knight g5 is the right move here, because after bishop f7, you just play the king up to e7 and queen f5. Small advantage here for white, but not a huge advantage. The other option is just to take queens off the board. Queen takes, pawn, king takes, and then knight back to e6 here. Material's a lot more even. It's sorry, not a lot more even. It is. White has an extra bishop. Black has an extra 2 pawns. And the other issue in this line is the knight sitting on h8 might end up getting trapped. Black played the thematic d5, and it's not a bad move because you're gaining a tempo and you're swinging your bishop into the game. The slight drawback is that white has a nice check here. Queen f7, king d8. Now, the Traxler is almost always about king safety in that black is counting on the fact that white's king is unsafe. But there is a risk, of course, that the black king also becomes unsafe in this position. So it often becomes a bit of a race. And also, it becomes a bit of a test of knowledge as well. Black normally has the advantage because black studies this opening. White normally isn't prepared for an opening like this. So black does get away with it. But on the other hand, there are some natural-looking moves that do work in white's favour. Queen f8 check here. Turns out that queen g8 check is a slightly better move. And the reason queen g8 check is a better move becomes clear after the move king d7 and you take on d5. And black's position is really starting to fall apart here. The reason why king f8, queen f8 doesn't quite work is after king d7, you're not taking on d5. And if you take on g7, it turns out that knight e7 is the right move here. Okay. I'll just come back to this position though. To avoid the check on d5 with the queen, you can play king e7, but then you can't play knight e7 in response to this move. So this is why queen g8 was more exact in that position and more correct. So the king comes to d7, queen takes. Knight e7 is the right move, but I'm going to show the game move later. And after the bishop retreats, we can play queen f2, king takes h3, and then we get a really nice move in this position. King to c6 is actually check. It's very rare you get to move your king to put your opponent in check. But the bishop on c8, of course, is now the uncovered attack. And in fact, you're just getting mated here. Queen g4, we just play the clever queen f3. The queen can't take the queen because of the pin from the bishop. And then after the king goes to h4, we just play queen takes g4. And this is one of the reasons we play the Traxler. So we can pull off little tricks like this. Instead, the best move is to play the queen back here. And after we swap queens and we take, and we take, and we take, and we take, king e6. And even though black is down a piece, that knight it's going to be very difficult for that knight to escape in this position. And then the position's going to be even slightly in favour of black. Instead, king d6 was played, and it makes perfect sense that we're going to march the king away, we're going to leave the bishop to come out to protect the knight, and then we're going to go for some tactics around the white king. There is a flaw in this line, which didn't quite get found by white. So knight f7 check. Remember, this game was played with 10 minutes each on the clock with a 2-second increment. So it wasn't a bit of a rush. Knight check. King comes up to c5. b4 is a nice move as well. King hides back here. Bishop e3. Check. d4. And then this is where white went wrong. White ended up threatening a mate in 1 in this position with queen f8. But it turns out that black only needed a single move here to kick off his own checkmating attack. What white should have played was knight c3. And the threat is just simply knight to a4, and that's a mate. And also because the bishop is still on e3, the pawn can't take the knight. Black is almost certainly forced to play a6 to give an escape square for the king. But after bishop g1, which is the next nice move, the bishop's sitting happily on g1, and it's covering all the important squares like f2. And after king a7 to start to run from danger, knight d5, bishop f5, queen g3, and this is actually quite good white in this position. And this is the last chance that white had to save the game with knight c3. Played queen f8 instead, and then queen g4. King has to go to f1, queen to f3, very nice. If we block with the queen takes f2 is checkmate. 1, queen takes e3, king d1, and then bishop g4, mate. Surprisingly, black realised it was mate. Black thought that they were winning the queen on f8 with the discovered check, and then only when the computer said, and it's checkmate, that's what's going on. Knight f2 with mate, I thought possibly be played here. So that's an example game of the Traxler, all very exciting. You're throwing pieces everywhere. There's lots of tricks, lots of sacrifices. The good news is if you want to play this as black, it's fun to learn and it's fun to play, and you've just got to do a little bit of preparation. And obviously there's some complicated tactics, but you can generally work through those. The bad news for black is white has lots of drawing lines, / even annoying bishop takes f7 type play here as well. So it's a great opening, but to be fair, it's an opening that usually relies on you catching your opponents unaware. So that's my little summation of the game from one of the ACT Chess Association online events a couple of weeks back in the Traxler. What I may do, depending on how much interest there is start digging up some of my old games from the past and working my way through a bit more Traxler theory over the next few weeks. But until then, my name is Sean Press. Thanks for tuning in to this stream about the Traxler, and hopefully there'll be plenty of more to come.